Hello everyone, it's Joe here for Complexity Card Gaming, back with another edition of Top Tier Talk. Today we are looking at Philip Schulz's Harrogate Regional winning deck list, Zoroark Gyarados, very creative and ingenious deck list which was able to take down the win, and we'll be talking about his card decisions within it, what other things that we might want to start looking into as the deck evolves, and how the deck was able to become so successful. So at its core, it is still just a Zoroark sort of controlling archetype. He has lots of healing options. He has that Oranguru to recycle resources, but he is playing this Gyarados line as well. And the Gyarados is clearly a big factor at helping you deal with Blacephalon, one of the most important decks to have in mind in the format right now. Clearly a powerful contender. It also got to the final of Harrogate, so obviously this helped Philip take the tournament down along the way as well as the final itself. But Gyarados, obviously a water type, can attack for a DC with this Venting Anger attack, which has 50 for each Magikarp in your discard pile, and this is usable with Ditto Prism Star as well. So the Gyarados on his own, if you have all the Magikarps in the discard and you're evolving into Ditto, or from Ditto, you can actually do 200 base with Venting Anger against anything in general. So if you can have that, plus the Kukuis and the Choice Band he plays in this deck, Gyarados hits really hard, which is pretty insane. You are definitely trying to hit for weakness against Blacephalon, but it's not dead in other matchups anyway. Very powerful non-GX Pokemon that sits in the active, is awkward to get knocked out against other like Zoroark decks and stuff like that. It forces them to have combo pieces all at once. So overall, he's just a really chunky, annoying Stage 1 Pokemon that has to be dealt with in a similar vein to something like a Weavile, which we often see with Zoroark, but instead just much more chunky, much better against things like Buzzwole decks because it forces a big attack from a Buzzwole, whereas Weavile can just get hit with like jet punches and sledgehammers and stuff like that. The Gyarados is much more stable. We also have 3 copies of the Submerge Magikarp. This protects it from the bench snipes, obviously important against the amount of Ninetales in the format right now, as well as Buzzwole, which is already a rough matchup for you. At least you can evolve your Magikarps up. And it also does play one of the other Magikarps. I can't remember what set this is from. Is this Crimson Invasion? No, it's Burning Shadows. It's Burning Shadows. A Magikarp without an ability. Crucial to not have an ability in certain matchups. Already mentioned Weavile, and this is much safer to be benched because it's not a free 50 damage for the opponent. Additionally, it can be used under Bell of Silence. You actually have an attacker in Gyarados which has no ability, so you can get this Magikarp and evolve it into Gyarados. I actually spoke to Philip about this Magikarp. I thought that he simply couldn't get a 4th copy of the good one, but he actually says that he would have preferred to have a 2-2 split because this is so useful against the likes of Bell of Silence and Weavile, which is notably popular. So potentially you could think about flip-flopping this Magikarp line if you want to, but it's not just a mistake that Robin couldn't find on the day. This actually has got some thought towards it. From there, we've got that 4-4 Zoroark, 2 Tapu Lele, as well as a Mysterious Treasure, so some high outs to get those Elms. Treasure being played over a 3rd copy of Lele simply because it can also grab yourself a Let Loose Marshadow, which offers some great disruption to the opponents, as well as a Alolan Muck, which is obviously powerful against lots of decks that require basic abilities. You can shut down other people's Dittos. Very good against Gramble, obviously, for locking out Orangurus. Similar story against things like Lost March, which actually popped up and was quite popular in Harrogate. So definitely a nice one-off to have. Pretty stable and standard for most Stage 1 Zoro builds to play this card now. From there, the Ditto. I mentioned how important it can be for the Gyarados to get really swinging and hit ridiculous numbers, but also good on the muck, and at the worst of times can become another Zoroark. And Philip plays so many bouncing cards with 3 copies of Acerola and 2 Palpads. You can quite happily just evolve into Zoroark from Ditto, knowing that you can recycle that and use it as a Gyarados or a Muck or whatever later down the line, because the deck is still trying to Zoroark bounce quite often, so very, very potent and powerful option there. The Ditto, obviously a fantastic card. Finally, 1 Resource Management Oranguru, obviously helps out against mill matchups. You can lock them from using Unknown Hand and force yourself at least a tie against mill if you want to. Gyarados as well can hit ridiculous numbers against some of these more stally Pokemon if need be. And in Zoroark mirror matches, you can do that thing of recovering things like Stretcher, Palpad, E-Hammer, Max Potion. these sorts of cards you can try and recycle, and it also means that you're a little bit less vulnerable with just the 4 copies of double colourless energy, which is what Philip has chosen to play here. Onto the item cards, I've already mentioned Treasure. I like it as a pseudo extra Lele for early hand openers, but also very nice for getting these other versatile pieces that you can go for. 1 copy of Rescue Stretcher, always nice with a Rangaroo to try and recycle it if it gets knocked out, and in general, recycling important cards. Then you have 2 copies of the Pal Pad. Typically it's a 1 copy, but Philip's gone all out to out-resource other Zoroarks in mirrors, and that's a really cool option to go for. Second Pal Pad means you can get back all of these Judges against more sort of Stage 2 based decks, more Acerolas and Zoroark Wars, more Guzmas, all that good stuff. Pal Pad, a very, very powerful card for recovering the most important cards in the right matchups. You can also see he's had Mill in mind because instead of playing an extra Cynthia, he's just playing 2 copies of Cynthia and 1 copy of Tantalizer, again, to help out against these Mill matchups, so that your Muck doesn't get stalled, which is hilarious. 3 copies of Enhanced Hammer, obviously a huge card for Zoroark, especially because Zoroark is typically playing either Weavile or Ninetales, which means they're playing usually all special energy cards, and that makes Enhanced Hammer an insane card. It essentially means they can't use Lycanroc as an attacker unless they're behind and use Counter Gain, and if they do that, you can then Enhanced Hammer once they've used their GX attack, and then the Lycanroc's no longer usable for them. So Enhanced Hammer is really important for the Zoroark matchup specifically, also very good in every Zoroark matchup, especially things like Decidueye as well. This is always reliant on trying to get like Ninetales attacks off. Trying to make that unusable is going to be huge for you. Good against Buzzrock, even they play unit energies at the moment because of Ninetales. Good against Super Boost based decks like Gardevoir as well to keep you out of range. So really important card in the format right now, and you can see why it's important because he's playing 3 whole copies. 1 copy of Max Potion, again, just one of these cards you can Orangaroo loop, so very, very strong to use. Also allows you to use a different supporter in the same turn, obviously a pretty big deal. And Philip has taken the same approach as we saw at the Latin American International Championships, combining 4 Elm with 4 Timables. He wants to get his Zoroarks into play and get drawing as many cards as possible. So 4 copies of Timer, very consistent build. Really a big fan of this, obviously. As well as the 4 copy of Ultra Ball to help you get Elm early and Zoroarks and all that good stuff when you need them. Onto these supporters, I've mentioned Tantalizer for the Mill matchups. That's the only real reason I think that's in there. As well as 2 copies of Cynthia, 2 copies of Judge. Again, can be nice for Mill matchups, can be nice for just sort of putting Muck down, Judge, attack with a Zoroark, etc. Also very good against these Stage 2 decks. Once they've used a Beacon, you can Judge that away, or just judging them early to make it hard for them to have an Elm, stuff like that. You can see Philip is definitely focused on trying to disrupt people because he is so straightforward with his own Zoroark build and can fall back on the likes of 4 Timables that he can let loose early on or use Judge early on, and he's more likely to get out of it than his opponent. So really nice to play 2 copies with 2 Pal Pads and Marshadow. The opponent basically can never build a hand if they're an opposing Zoroark player, which is very good for you. 2 copies of Kukui. Obviously, it's nice so that you can one-shot Tapu Leles. Also means that your Gyarados can push that much more with Venting Anger. It's a nice addition in the deck just for more damage here and there. Also means that you can hit 120 even when there's a Pseudo-Wudo on board, which actually became relevant in Harrogate because there were some Onyx attacking decks around. So that's silly but relevant that now we have to, bear that in mind, I guess. So Kukui's pretty big for that. Also means you can one-shot Shuckles with that double attachment of DCEs, so all sorts of things Kukui can fix for you, which is pretty cool. 3 copies of Acerola, even that's on the high side, even with 2 Pal Pads, so he's really trying to loop his attackers whenever possible. 3 copies of Guzma, again with the 2 Pal Pads, he has as much gusting as he needs, especially with a Rangaroo. And that pretty much rounds out the support accounts other than Elm, which is pretty much obvious. One thing to note, of course, is that you can use Elms later on in the game just to get Magikarps to then start trading them away to power up your Gyarados. So they're a nice way of searching out damage and giving yourself free trades, essentially, because they love hitting the discard pile for your Venting Anger attack. 3 copies of Choice Band. It's interesting that he is a more aggressive build despite being so Zoroark based, and that's because Choice Band is so, again, amazing with Gyarados. pushes it to 200 quite easily with like Kukui, Choice Band, or when you are doing those Ditto attacks, you can actually knock out things like a Gardevoir thanks to a Choice Band. So again, a really huge call from him to hit much better numbers, and it's just really, really beneficial to have that much more aggression in your list when you need it. And 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy, all he needs. He can recycle it with a Rangaroo. Obviously, you're a little bit upset if you come up against a Xurkitree deck, but even then, he could probably just beat a Xurkitree, like a straight Xurkitree deck, because he can just Acerola loop and a Rangaroo loop anyway, and probably just deck them out in a very slow game. But yeah, it essentially means this deck has no flaws. I think for me, the only strange count is that he's not playing any copies of Field Blower or any Stadium in general. This means that Prism Star Stadiums stay in play for the whole game, which is always a concern. And it means that Shrine stays in play for the whole game. So against Gramble decks, you're really hoping that the Muck plus the Judges and stuff like that can carry you so that they can't lower the hand size. You're also hoping that you don't come up against much like Passimian Tapu Koko decks or Weavile spread decks. These are the sort of things that you really don't want to look out for, or don't want to run into, because they'll definitely be awkward for you. Even some Lost March players are starting to tech in Shrine as well. So I think for me, personally, I would probably drop a Choice Band for at least 1 Stadium card. But I think that's really the only thing. 2 Power Pad is just so useful. And if there's going to be mirror matches popping up, you kind of need to keep the 2 Power Pads because they're so important in a mirror match that you need them now. So if you're the one cutting and the opponent hasn't cut from the list, then you're going to lose that matchup unless you're able to get the Gyarados to just sweep the board, which probably won't happen. But if you play Devoured Field actually in mirror matches, it means you can Kukui Devoured Field and knock out a Gyarados in 1 hit, which is actually quite funny. So the Devoured Field is a card I would definitely think about putting into the list for mirror matches, hilariously, as well as like Gramble and these other non-GX decks that like to play Shrine. And the fact that you can bounce it against things like Blacephalon, whilst your Zoroark can also take a knockout with the Kukui, Choice Band, all that shenanigans. But beyond that, I think Philip's list is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, a huge result for him. He's not been playing as much this season, but he's still able to come out with some incredible results. A fantastic player, no doubt. Brother of our current world champion, of course. But he's no slouch himself, and he's proved it again with a fantastic and innovative list that has taken him all the way to a big win for an almost 500 player tournament. So huge props to him. The list is very cool, some great decisions within it, and really interesting to see this deck create a lot of buzz after the first 2 or 3 rounds, and then he had swarms of people watching him for pretty much the rest of the day. So that was pretty cool to see, and seeing Gyarados at top tables was very awesome as well. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll be back to show off Jimmy's winning list as well from the same weekend, but in Expanded, and that's going to be hard for me to piece together because I need to learn Expanded myself a little bit more first. For now, though, it has been Joe for Complexity Card Gaming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon.